Thanks for joining. This is Carole from the STS, and this is the Adult Cardiac Surgery Database Quality Improvement Series kickoff. We'll be working on decreasing vent times nationally using the STS Adult Cardiac Database. Today's April 19th. On the call with me, I have Dr. Glenn Whitman from Johns Hopkins, who's one of our surgeon leaders for the adult cardiac, and many of you who have attended AQO know him well and love his presentations, and I'm very thankful and happy that he's here with us today to work on that. He'll share his story from Hopkins as we get closer to the end of the presentation. Please be sure to enter questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those following Dr. Whitman's presentation. But to kick things off, I will be going over the basics of this project, what my hopes and dreams are, and how we can get there together, because this is going to be our project. So on the call with me, like I said, we have Dr. Whitman and then my STS colleagues, Addie, Catherine, Leanne, and the wonderful Melinda Offer. To begin with, this quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead, who looks an awful lot like STS's Donna McDonald. So we are those thoughtful, committed individuals of a small group. We have 430 folks, just about 430 folks on the call with us today, and we're going to change the world in vent times for CABG patients. Thanks for the heart emoji icons. I love them. So to start with, and I assume that we probably have similar to the group of folks whom we normally have on here, and then we probably have a few new people. So just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Carole Krohn, the director of the STS National Databases, and I oversee the adult cardiac one closely. To begin, we're going to do I think we've begun 5 times in this call already, but now we're going to talk about the quality improvement series and what the goals are of this this project. To begin with, we're going to show the value of the database. Just outside of getting reports and star ratings, we're going to show how powerful this data can be, both at a site level, but more importantly, at a national level. And we're going to be part of a national team effort. So we're going to do this together, and we're going to improve patient outcomes together, because at the end of the day, the whole point of the STS National Database is for the improvement of patient outcomes. In doing so, we hope that we decrease costs and we make the data actionable. And then we're also going to show how important you are in abstracting the data and being a quality data specialist. We'll start with we're going to use this data. We're going to work together, share ideas, share progress, share quality improvement projects that we've done together, help each other out, and support one another through this, and be there as a crutch answering questions for each other. We're going to start with the isolated CABG and vent times, but we're going to expand to all procedure types once we are successful, and we'll also expand to other comorbidities following the vent times. And it's also just awesome to work together towards something. It makes us all have ownership in this, and that's how we're going to get to a good outcome following this project and then leading into our next one. So why do we care about vent times? Vent times and renal failure are 2 of the highest costs following coronary artery bypass surgery. Related to, in addition to just the mechanisms themselves of increased vent time, there is a higher rate of patients having increased rate of infection, renal failure, stroke, and mortality. There is a decrease in early ambulation, which leads to a slower recovery. And something that we sometimes don't consider is the decrease in patients' quality of life after discharge. So their decrease in functional status from being non-ambulatory following their prolonged ventilation, and the debilitating effect that this has when they're laying in the hospital bed for so long on their discharge to home or to rehab. For hospitals, why do they care? Well, we have increased ICU staff costs, right? The more patients you have that are intubated longer, the more nursing care they need. And that leads to increased costs associated with the complications. Patients laying in bed longer are prone to all sorts of things, bed sores, the pneumonia, infections, things that we list underneath the patient column. Their increased length of stay, and also decrease in number of patients to be able to be cared for. So if you have patients in the ICU who are ventilated, you're not moving those patients out, which means you're taking up a bed for somebody else who could be there. And that can cause your ER to back up. That can be an issue when things like the COVID pandemic happens and we don't have enough ventilators or ICU beds. So this is something to focus on, so we can hopefully decrease the number of bed days for these patients, getting them up earlier, moving them quicker, getting them on the track to recovery and home sooner. Ultimately, for hospitals, this is a decrease in efficiency and an increase in cost, which their return on investment for this project should be that they support you in this endeavor, and for return of their support, they should see some type of return, and that would be both in cost and patient satisfaction, as well as an improved culture of the hospital and teamwork. I pulled this information, AHRQ, which is a national hospital quality improvement project, published this in January of 2017. I will provide slides along with this PDF to where I pulled this information. And so why do we care about it? Well, what do we do about it? We know why we care about it. What do we do about it? Well, let's do a process improvement project to see if we can make it better for all our stakeholders, especially for our patients. So together we're going to work on that, and we're going to use this define, measure, analyze, improve, control. You can also use the plan, do, act, I think it is. And I think there's a C in there somewhere, right, Melinda?
Check. Yeah, check.
Plan, do, check, act.
Yep.
I think there's multiple process improvement tools that can be implemented for doing projects like this. I prefer, my Lean Six Sigma background prefers the define, measure, analyze, improve, control. So I simply laid out what I thought made sense here, but because this is our project, I'm certainly open to comments and suggestions on how to improve this tool to begin with. So this is kind of like our mission statement. Define it. What's the issue? Well, or what do we want to do? We want to nationally decrease vent times for post-op CABG patients over the next 12 to 24 months. We'll measure this quarterly using the STS Adult Cardiac Harvest Analysis Report and the longitudinal dashboards. For Harvest 1, we had a mean benchmark time of 15.07. I looked at the Harvest 1 reports, which were just released this week, and our time was 15.30. It just went up a little bit, and we'll use that data as we go forward. And then a risk-adjusted rate for the 3-year analysis using the longitudinal dashboard, our risk-adjusted rate of 5.28% for prolonged ventilation. So we'll keep an eye on those too. We're hoping that as we decrease vent times nationally, our return in that would be also a decrease in the prolonged ventilation rate. Using the STS Harvest reports and longitudinal dashboards, the sites are going to implement processes to decrease local vent times and decrease prolonged ventilation. I'll work here at STS by providing education and support for the process and looping in sites and institutions or collaboratives that have successfully done this. I have a few folks in my back pocket that I know will be great people to help educate you on and share information with. So I'll be reaching out to those, and Dr. Whitman was my first go-to person. And then we'll engage site leaders who have already accomplished decreased both vent time and prolonged ventilation, and to provide education on webinars as resources. We're going to track this monthly to see improvement nationally. But that's really nice, but how are we going to do it? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the data. We're going to see if there's an issue. It doesn't look like there's necessarily an issue, but at your site, you need to look at your data and you need to break it down. Look at your patients who have any isolated CABG patient, look at their vent times, look at those cases and see if you have outliers or folks who are outside of what you think is acceptable. Look at the costs that you're spending on your patients, and then see where there's room for improvement, because there's always going to be room for improvement. Nobody's ever going to be perfect. Measure it, like I said, H1 analysis shows a mean national event time of benchmark of 15.3 hours. Even if we decrease this nationally by just a few hours, we're preventing patients from bad outcomes and the costs associated with those. So this is a national benchmark looking at, I think we had over or close to 1,000 sites. Imagine if we all just cut it down by 1 hour, how that would impact our benchmark and what we're doing nationally for our patients and for the healthcare system. Analyze, we'll look at the STS harvest reports and longitudinal dashboards. We're going to use these webinars and other tools to implement processes, as well as reaching out to our peers and hearing peer-to-peer about success and failure stories for working on decreasing vent times. And then who's going to help us? Well, we have stakeholders. We have to figure out who our stakeholders are at our hospital and why do they care, and what level of interest do they hold in that, and what level of impact do they hold in it. So who cares the most and who has the largest impact? Those are the people you're going to want to work with to begin to get their support, and then go on from there. And we can talk more about that if there's questions. Colleagues who have already accomplished decreased both vent and prolonged ventilation. And then to control this, we're going to track it monthly on a national level. But internally, you could use your longitudinal reports and your internal dashboards to monitor this, check for compliance, and jump on things that aren't quite working right, right when you notice them. And we're going to go through, as we go through these series of webinars, we're going to use those dashboards and talk about what kind of things you should be paying attention to on those dashboards and when you should notice that there's an issue or not. So where are we at? This is Harvest 1 data. And I put 2 green lines here. I don't think I got to the other slide yet with the second green line at the 12-hour mark. But we know that the 24-hour mark is the definition of prolonged ventilation. For this analysis, I have all data here. It was 1,022 sites. In analysis, we had 982 sites. That's where our average of 15.3 came from. All data for the 1,022 sites include sites that were not included for analysis, either sites that are no longer participating but had submitted data in the last 3 years, or maybe they merged with other sites, or for whatever reason we have just a difference of 40 sites here. This data on the bottom, this is the Harvest average all data of the 1,022 sites. We're going to look here, the prolonged vent time. We hope to see that this decreases some. We don't want these bad sites over here. You know, we want to help these folks out, not bad sites, but we want to help these folks out by sharing more information and helping being a support to them. And then we have these sites that fall between the 6-hour and the 12-hour mark. I picked 12 hours just because I read a couple of studies that look like at 12 hours, but 6 hours is also important because that's how we defined early extubation. And we'll get into that with Dr. Whitman further. And then I broke it down further by high volume sites, which is a volume over 1,200 cases for 3 years. And this is where we're falling. So we had 41 sites who are considered high volume sites. This is their average vent time. Most sites are falling between the 6 and 24-hour mark. We had just 2 outliers who were outside of that range. For the moderate volume sites, quite more, we had an N of 186. Again, most folks falling between, but we have this heavy on the right side that we want to see come down some. And it would be great just to see the overall flatten out a little bit. So we're all doing same, right? Quality is everybody doing the same thing and getting the same outcomes, which are hopefully good. Low volume sites, average vent time, we're here, and you can see just heavy on the right side for about a couple 100 and so sites, N of N76, and we're about site 683, where we see the average go above what we define as prolonged ventilation. So we'll have this data run every quarter. We'll see hopefully see a trend, more downward trend on here. And then what does it all mean? Well, we're not doing too bad, but as quality improvement specialists, we know that there's always room for improvement. Some sites are doing very well, but others are struggling. We can all do better. Yeah, so I'm going to hand it over. So following that comment, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Whitman. He's going to share his story from Hopkins and what they did to drastically improve their vent times there. So Dr. Whitman, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to stop sharing if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen.
Thank you. Yep, we can see it.
First, this is going to be a little bit extemporaneous. I actually thought I was going to have a fireside chat with Carole and a bunch of her cronies, and then all of a sudden, 15 minutes ago, it's, well, no, Glenn, you might be talking to 500 people around the country, and I've got to apologize, but this is going to be a fireside chat with all 500 of you. But this is let me just tell you things that I know and what I think about when I approach early extubation. And by the way, for this talk, I have no disclosures. Here's a study where they look at people who get extubated in less than 6 hours out of 2,700, and they find people who look exactly like them who don't get extubated in less than 6 hours. That's what this study's about. And in those who got, by the way, this is old, this is 2009. It was almost unbelievable what they found, but the chances of renal failure were a fifth, half the incidence of any infectious complication, a third of pneumonia, length of stay was vastly diminished, prolonged length of stay was vastly diminished, and their operative mortality was half. Quote, propensity matched as well as they did it. And I think it's in some respects what all of us think, maybe not to this degree, that if you get off that ventilator early, you're going to do better. But then the issue came, what about older people? Now, I chuckle at this because the definition of elderly in this was, I think, over 70. And everybody, I turned 70 this year.
No way,
and now
Dr.
I look
Whitman.
at this and I say, are you kidding me? I am in this study. And, but the question was, you can't take an old guy, me, and extubate them early. You're going to get yourself into trouble. And the answer is, no, you're not. Look at, I know I have a circle there, but look at mortality. The mortality was no different in these elderly guys who got off in less than 6 hours versus 6 to 12 hours. As an example, by the way, although it was not statistically different, it was less to take an old guy and, quote, stress him out or her out and get them off. So okay, so we're not killing any old people by getting them off the ventilator early. But what we are doing is we're decreasing postoperative length of stay and even increasing discharge. That's 7 versus 7.6 statistically significant. So we save a half a day. And furthermore, we increase the number of people who get out of the hospital 5 days or less, 29% versus 22%. So this was all good news. But the other thing I want everybody to know is we've got this 6-hour mark out there, which someone made up. They could have chosen 4 hours, they could have chosen 8. And honestly, even now, I think they just thought 6 hours seemed to be something we should be shooting for. And so that's why there's this get off the ventilator in less than 6 hours benchmark. But remember, quality is getting off is you get a demerit if you're on the ventilator for more than 24 hours. And I'll show you some data on why that's so important.
Dr. Whitman, I just want to say I'm so thankful you said that about 6 hours, because everything I read has been saying that the 6 hours was just an arbitrary number. And it's hard for me to defend it when I don't know why, but it seems that that is the case, that somebody said that that would be a good idea, but we don't really have any data supporting it.
So although that goes back into between like 2005 or 2008, it was indefensible then. But now there's increasing data that suggests that it wasn't a bad number to choose. But I'll talk to you about it in a second, okay? But in the early 2000s, it was a made-up number. It seemed okay. And people said, okay, let's see if we can get people off in 6 hours. And then studies about 6 hours started coming out. So here's one with extubations in less than 8 hours. 30 studies were looked at in this Cochrane analysis, which is known for getting a whole bunch of studies together. And what did they see? That in terms of morbidities, getting off in less than 8 hours compared to more than 8 hours, again, people were worried in the early 2000s that we would be hurting patients by getting them off the ventilator early. And so this study simply confirmed that death, postoperative MIs, postoperative strokes, they were not increased. The relative risk here is 1. There was no increased relative risk. Interestingly, there was a signal for more reintubations. But on the other hand, if you look at what happens with lengths of stay, when you got the time to extubation down in the 8-hour range, you decreased length of stay in the ICU by around 6 to 8 hours, and you decreased length of hospital stay by a half a day. And we already saw that. So this is now 30 studies that are saying very little risk and no risk in terms of extubating early, but benefits in terms of getting up, moving out, and leaving the hospital. So this is our data. And what I wouldn't have imagined, but which turns out to be true, is that infection rates, but not just pneumonias, which I'll show you, but all infection rates are diminished the sooner you get off the ventilator. And this is going to speak a little bit to that 6-hour mark. But if you look at postoperative infections, and by the way, everybody realize this is coming from our data, your data, the data that comes from all of our patients that you enter. Now, this happens to be Hopkins STS database, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, and Carole just presented the adult cardiac surgery database data. None of this is possible without the data being entered. You can't drive progress without data. You've got to be able to measure what you're doing. It all comes from you. But look at this data at Hopkins, where you can see from 1 to 6 hours, the infection rate was 2.7, 6 to 12, no different. But over 12 hours, now all of a sudden 5%, 24 to 48, you've doubled it. So now over 24 hours, it's 5 times the infection rate for 1 to 6 hours. And then as soon as you get to more than 2 days, it's increasing asymptotically. So you can see that, again, I think lucky that we chose the 24-hour mark, but that's when it seems to start going up in terms of infections. On the vent for more than 24, 11%, then 36% infection rate. Look at pneumonia. So pneumonia, less than 12 hours, no difference. So you're getting a feel here with this study at Johns Hopkins that 0 to 12 hours doesn't seem to be that different. But now all of a sudden you get to 12 to 24, it doubles. And again, 24 to 48, and then over 48 hours. And that's what it feels like, everybody. When you're on a ventilator for more than 24 hours, it feels like there's a risk of infection. When you're on for 2 days, some weeks, it feels like everybody's getting infected. By the way, this jumps up to 40%, this jumps to 40% at 72 hours. And here I just piled them on top of each other. The blue is pneumonia. The gray is surgical site infections or deep sternal wound infections. And you can see 1 to 12, very little difference. But as soon as you get more than 12, and then for sure when you get over 24, things really increase. Bottom line, get people off the ventilator. Okay. So in 2008, we determined that the Quality Assurance and Performance Improvement Committee for the cardiac ICU at Johns Hopkins needed to have the appropriate people there, the stakeholders, like the nurses, the respiratory therapists, the surgeons, the anesthesiologists, the intensivists. Everybody needed to be present for any performance improvement project that was going to occur. And at least in those days, believe it or not, there was a PI group that I just described, and we all met twice a month. And we aimed at things like hospital length of stay, ICU length of stay. I hope you can see my pointer. I'm walking down the left-hand column. Drug utilization. Believe it or not, we were using albumin to resuscitate patients, volume resuscitate patients. We were spending $30,000 a month on albumin. It's true, albumin works, but it doesn't work better than crystalloid. And crystalloid is 75 cents for a liter, and albumin's $100 for a liter, for $100 for the equivalent. Diarrhea, instead of using Lasix or metolazone, we were using Diarrhea to diurese patients. Believe it or not, Diarrhea is $350 a dose. Lasix is a nickel a dose. And for some reason or other, someone got into his mind that Diarrhea was better than Lasix. It's not. And we were spending $100,000 a year more on Diarrhea. So the PI committee was great. It came up with all these issues that it thought were important. And look in the upper right-hand corner, someone said, I think we have very poor extubation times. And they were right, but no one had looked at it. So this PI committee said, let's just see where we sit. And this is now, what, 16, 17 years ago, and this is what the world looked like. STS Light, this is more than 500 beds, fellowship program. 1 out of 5 patients got off the ventilator in less than 6 hours. Nationally, only 30% of patients got off the ventilator in less than 6 hours. And Hopkins, which was not used to being at the bottom of the rung at anything, was 1 in 7 patients got off the ventilator, and only 16% in less than 6 hours. We were aghast. And we sort of looked at the literature, and we realized as a group that the way to do this was to take it out of the hands of the doctors, take it out of the hands of the residents and the advanced care practitioners. We're all too busy taking care of patients who aren't doing well, and leave extubation in the hands of the respiratory therapists and the bedside nurse. And so we created a process that took us, the physicians I just described who us was, take us out of the equation and let the bedside nurse and the respiratory therapist figure out when to take a person off the ventilator. And so this is what we said. Everybody would come out with a respiratory rate of 16. This is the minute they hit the ICU. Everybody would have a respiratory rate of 16, 8 cc's per kilo. We waited until they were 36 degrees until we reversed them, and because they all come out paralyzed. The reason you wait to 36 degrees is because when you paralyze, we thought when you paralyze a person under 36 degrees, they're chilly and they shiver in order to warm up, as opposed to if they're paralyzed, they don't shiver, there's no huge metabolic stress on them, and they warm up from the bear hugger and the environment. And then when they hit 36 degrees, then when you reverse them, they won't shiver anymore. They'll just get warmer on their own without shivering. So we standardized the process. The second thing we did was or at least we proposed a standardized process. The second thing we did was we said that the nurse was going to be the person who determined extubation timing. And when they felt the patient was hemodynamically stable, not bleeding, not making acid, and could communicate with them, they would call respiratory therapy. And we wouldn't wean. We would go from this full support, respiratory rate of 16, tidal volumes 8 cc's per kilo, and immediately flip to breathe on your own with a little bit of help when you take a breath called pressure support, and blow out against a little bit of pressure to keep your lungs expanded, which is called PEEP or CPAP, 5 centimeters. So pressure support of 5, PEEP of 5, and we would do that for 30 minutes and get a gas. And if the gas looked okay, only then was the provider called. Okay, that was what the PI group wanted to do. Now, the problem was that the PI group decided to do this without telling the 16 intensivists in the ICU. There were some who were represented, as in one was a representative to the PI group, but the others weren't. And as the new director of this ICU, I sat down with the anesthesiologist, because all of the other intensivists were anesthesiologists, and said, all right, this is the proposal. And you'd think this would have been simple, but it wasn't. And it took a great deal of doing, as in weeks, to get everybody to not control it, let the nurse control it, let RT and the nurse control it, and then only come in at the end when we're presented with the blood gas and the mechanics. It wasn't easy. And somehow I thought it was going to be, was wrong. But look what happened. We were at 12% extubation rate in between 2005 and 2009. And then we started this protocol in 2009, and we doubled our early extubation rate from 12 to 24%, which was great. And remember, you may not remember, but I'll point it out to you. 24%. Well, now all of a sudden we're kind of average, as opposed to much, much worse than average. STS-like was 22%, but that is not the case, because while we were improving, so was the rest of the country. And so the 22% went to 32% for the rest of the country in 2009. By the way, all from the data that you all collect for everybody to improve quality, and the national average improved to 37%. So the country went from 22 to 32. We doubled our improvement, 12 to 24, but we weren't keeping up. At which point, one of the fellows at the PI meeting said, you know, we don't have a way of really keeping track of when the 6 hours is up. So let's get a way to do that. And so I went to Home Depot and I got one of these digital clocks and brought it in. It was around $8. And I said, let's put this up with sticky tape in the back on top of every bed, and we'll hit the bit, we'll start the clock going when the patient hits the room, and we'll know when 6 hours goes by. And everybody thought it was a good idea until bioengineering said, no, you can't do that. We have to evaluate that device, at which point they said, no, it's not safe, but we can put enough, $8, remember, we can put a real digital clock on top of each bed, and it'll only cost $2,500. We'll have to hardwire it and do this, that, and the other thing, but then we'll know it's safe. $8, $2,500. And we're all sitting at the PI committee, talking to the bioengineer saying, you've got to be kidding us. When the fellow says, you know, why don't we just put up this little pink sheet? And as soon as a person goes in a room, we'll put this right on top of his door, and we'll write down what time he arrives. Do you see, this is in 2012. We'll put what time he arrives, and we'll write 4 hours post, 4 p.m., and then he's got to be off the ventilator by 6 p.m., and we'll put that up there in front of everybody to see. And that cost a penny, and it was reusable because we could clean it off at the end of every case because it was a magic marker that was erasable. And then look what happened. So we went from 20, so this was 12%. put everything in the hands of the nurses and the respiratory therapists, 24%. And now we put up this little marker that says when is 4 hours and when is 6 hours, and everybody can keep track for literally a penny a patient. And we improved from 24 to 38%, which was fantastic. Problem is everybody else was getting better. So we still are, we're creeping up on average, but not quite average. Whereas at this point now 40%, but up from 22% in 2008. Now it's 40% of patients for the country at large are getting off the ventilator. Okay? Then listen to this. I think many of you know that certain states or groups of states have gotten together to create quality consortiums, like the Virginia Cardiac Surgery Quality Initiative, or the New England Quality Initiative Consortium. There are several in the country where a bunch of cardiac surgery programs have gotten together and agreed to share their STS data with each other and best practices with each other in order to improve quality for everybody. And we started that. John Conti and Diana Leo started this in 2010, 2011. And one of the first things we did at that point, and by the way, I somehow found myself the head of quality for the Maryland Cardiac Surgery Quality Initiative. We all decided we were going to go at early extubation. Just like we're talking about it today, 12 years later, we said we'll do it then. And as we're talking, and I showed everybody how great we're doing, the pink sheet and everything, the guy named Keith Horvath, who worked down the street, said, Glenn, why do you put up the 6 hour mark? That's what you're shooting for, to get them off at 6 hours. Put up that mark at 5 hours. Try to shoot for your first spontaneous breathing trial at 3 or 4 hours, but try to shoot to get them off the ventilator at 5 hours. And then if you miss, you still have that hour to get them off. And I said to myself, golly, I'm such a dummy. We did exactly what Keith said. And then look what happened. So now that's that little pink sheet, which is telling everybody to get off in 5 hours. Now we go from 38 to now period 4, we're 51%. And now we're better than average. Unbelievable. I was so ecstatic. And then you can see what happened to our mean vent times. This is what Carole was showing everybody. Our mean vent time had been 10 hours, and we got it down to what, 6 hours, something like that. So half of our, well, as you saw, half of our patients were getting off the ventilator in less than 6 hours. So it was so rewarding to do this. So this is now what we call our Tableau dashboard. It's hooked directly up to our Epic electronically. And so on a weekly basis, we ping Epic, and it feeds this database with our extubation times. And you can see, for example, well, let's pick a good one. Here we were, 40% of our patients got all the way over upper left-hand corner is where I am. 40. So now this is 2020. This is 8 years after this project started. 40% of people got off in less than 6 hours. We now had 30% of people getting off the ventilator intraoperatively. Intra-op, that's the green line. So, I mean, so now we're up to 75% of patients are getting off the ventilator in less than 6 hours. And you can see only 3% were on the ventilator between 6 and 7 hours, as opposed to 16%. And we follow this every week. We show ourselves this data, and you can see we're starting to get a little bit off track. We're not at 75% anymore. We're at 63%. This past quarter, 9% of people were on the ventilator between 6 and 7 hours. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I think we've had probably an 80% nurse turnover in the ICU in the past 2 years during COVID. And we all think that this gradual rise has to do with the fact that we don't have the same nurses and everybody needs to be educated. But okay, by showing ourselves the data, that's exactly the point that we see, okay, we're seeing a little bit of a problem, and it makes us pay attention to this. What I wasn't able to get for this meeting, I'm going to stop sharing. What I wasn't able to get for this meeting was the following. Remember, I just told you about the Maryland Cardiac Surgery Quality Initiative, and Virginia has one, and New England has them, the Pacific has them, Texas has one. Well, Don Lukowski in Michigan, they have theirs, has a consortium of consortiums. There are around 8 consortiums that meet, and it's called the Improve Network. And they all got together over the past 3 or 4 years to share all of the extubation data, because we were still not sure whether 24 hours is really the right metric for quality, or 6 hours, is that the right metric for, quality, or what's the deal with getting off the ventilator intraoperatively. And so now we had 170,000 patients that were given to us, all with data generated by you, because it was the consortium of consortiums. Wouldn't have been possible to do this without all the work that you do. And now we're able to look at, question number 1, intra-op extubation versus less than 6 hours. There were 100,000 people who got extubated in less than 6 hours. 7,000 people or so who got extubated intraoperatively. We compared them, and how did they do? By the way, bottom line, dumbing it down a little bit, it doesn't pay to get extubated in the operating room. Unless you do it more than 40% of the time, you have more problems extubating in matched patients. You have more problems extubating intraoperatively than once you get to the operating room. That was question 1. Question 2 in this study, which we presented at the STS just a couple months ago. Question 2 in this study was, well, where is the number of hours on a ventilator where the tire starts coming off the truck? And the answer was 24 hours. Between 1 hour to roughly 20 hours, it was a gradual increase in complications, gradual. But at the 24th hour, it just skyrockets. So it makes sense that maybe 24 hours is really, that's when you're really hurting the patient by being on the ventilator for more than 24. By the way, the first hour that was different than 0 to 2 hours was the 12th hour. So really, 0 to 12 hours is statistically not significant in terms of postoperative complications. And then it starts, but it's rising, continues to rise gently until the 24th, and then it just skyrockets, as I showed you with our data 10 years ago or 14 years ago. Take-home lessons. We need your data. You need a champion who's going to show your data to everybody. It's an ICU thing. It's not really an intra-op problem. It is in a way because of the narcotics that they might use. But that's why you need an anesthesiologist in on it. But you need an ICU champion, RT and nursing and surgery. Everybody has to be aware of what's going on and be willing to let an RN and an RT run it. And then everybody sees the data. And the more you show yourselves the data, the better you're going to be able to improve the data. And that's all I wanted to say.
That's how the cookie crumbles, Dr. Whitman.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. That was beyond a wonderful presentation, especially for me throwing it at you last minute. So I greatly appreciate. Look at all the love you're getting, Dr. Whitman. I don't know if you could see that on your screen or not, but
I was becoming disconcerted by all of those.
I'm going to try to ask you a couple questions here, if that's okay. Do you want to be left on the big screen since you're the only one on camera? And I did bring Diana Leho over on the panelist side, because I know she's always a big part of the project at Hopkins, and her knowledge is just beyond compare when it comes to QI projects and the use of data at site. So I'm gonna, if you have a few minutes, I'd like to ask you some questions. I won't keep you to go through all of the questions, but just the ones that I think are
I'm
the
ready.
ones that. Okay, all right, here we go. Let me get to the ones. What about, and I think you answered this already, what about patients who are able to be extubated in the OR? Some of our anesthesiologists do this. You had already talked about that.
What we showed was that if you do it more than 40% of the time, it's no different. If you do it less than 40% of the time, some patients individually might benefit, but as a group, no. Too many reintubations.
Wonderful. Okay, and two questions that kind of loop in together, one from Judy and one from Dr. Huey, who's down in Texas. It says, Dr. Whitman, one question, playing devil's advocate, what do you say to non-believers who say that pneumonia is what leads to prolonged ventilation rather than vice versa?
Pneumonia doesn't increase between the 4th and 10th hour, or hardly. You know, it increases by 1%, maybe. That's not what's keeping them on the vent. Between the 4th and 10th hour, what did I think I showed? It's a process measure. It's not a patient physiology measure. It's a process measure. You're not, I'll give you an example. I mean, they're coming out too cold, come out warmer. I mean, I wanted to end my talk, so I wanted to have a chance for questions. But we keep track of how warm they are when they come out so that we can reverse them sooner. That's point one. Everybody comes, we were using narcotics to keep them calm and relaxed. Now we use an anxiolytic called dexmedetomidine, which is not a respiratory depressant. And so we extubate them on Precedex. Another process measure, we leave this in the hands of the RN and the RT. It's another process measure. So I don't think this is a physiologic problem with the patients. I think this is setting up your ICU and this early extubation protocol so that it's set for success. Again, you heard, I don't think this is a physiologic problem and that people are on the ventilator longer because they can't get off. We're the ones, they can get off. It was CABG is a CABG. And we went from 12% to 75%. Same patient. They can get off.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Whitman. Do you have the off-pump early extubation? I'm not sure what that means, if that makes sense to you. I don't know.
You know, we don't do off-pump surgery. 2% of our patients are off-pump.
Wonderful.
So it's very hard to teach off-pump to fellows, and we have fellows. And it's hard to teach a fellow who is trying to figure out how to, focus his loops to work on a moving vessel. So,
right.
so I don't. What's the data? They don't get out sooner. They don't get off the ventilator soon.
Wonderful. Judy is saying they follow the 6 to 7 hour group also. Did you look at anything specific in that group to see what was holding them up? Or was it just a timing issue? Because
we did look. I don't have that data with me, but we tried to write down the reasons, not for 6 hours. We wrote down the reasons for why people are on the ventilator more than 24 hours. But as you just heard, by putting up that little pink sheet and presenting the data on a weekly basis, we dropped that 16%, 6 to 7 hours to 3%. I think it's just a process issue. We didn't do anything different. Maybe the Precedex makes a difference. It used to be so expensive, we didn't use it. But then when it became cheaper, we started using it. It's a miracle drug because patients don't come off the ventilator with anxious. It takes all of that edge off. Point one, and point two, we come out warmer. Maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah. Do you use propofol post-op sedation off within how many hours?
As soon as they come back and they're not bleeding, we turn the propofol off, and we just manage them with Precedex. So 30 minutes to 60 minutes, the propofol's off, and they're just on Precedex.
Give paralytic reversal. Can you give your thought on that?
Say that question one more time.
What are your thoughts on giving the paralytic reversal that's in your protocol?
As soon as we know they're not bleeding, we reverse them.
Okay.
If they come out and there's 20 cc's in the Pleurovac, anesthesia before the sign out's finished, one of the anesthesia residents has reversed them. And then we just manage them on, and then the propofol gets turned off and we manage them on Precedex. If they're cold, they'll still, meaning 36 degrees, we'll reverse them. If they're under 36, we'll wait.
And put warm blankets on?
Oh, by the way, 35.5 is what we use now. And we use a bear hugger on everybody, so they don't come out at 30. No matter
There
what
you go.
they come out, we spend the money on a bear hugger so they don't drop their temperature.
There you go. That's the bear hugger.
It's the first thing we do.
That's great.
A bear hugger on them.
And I have a few other questions, but I know we're getting at time. Do you mind just taking a few more, and then I can manage the rest of them? Or
I'll take more.
Okay, thank you. Did you see any increase in complications from the intraoperative extubations?
So you saw that when we started doing intraoperative extubations, we really went at it hook, line, and sinker, and we're doing 30%. And there was a signal that they were, well, they weren't in the OR, they weren't in the ICU less, they weren't in the ICU less. There was a small non-statistical signal that their length of stay was less. But other than that, we didn't see a difference.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get into the cost, because if you come out on a ventilator, then you have to set up the ventilator and everything. And we didn't get into the cost of it, but it's always been an issue about early extubating in the operating room. And I think we've now answered the question with that 150,000 patient study. Unless you do it a lot, you hurt the patients. And if you do it a lot, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And you really have to have nursing staff that's aware when those patients are extubated about what to look for should they start experiencing bad outcomes.
I don't want to be anecdotal, but let me be anecdotal. They
Yeah.
come up with PCO2s of 50 and pHs of 7.3.
Yeah.
And it's just so painful to and then you worry, and then you put them on BiPAP and you struggle.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier if you just extubated 2 hours later and you don't have to do any of that.
No, and it's better for the patient. They don't go through all that physiologically within themselves. So that's good to know. So I think Diane's answering a question. The question was from Sharina. Since prolonged ventilation is really a major morbidity across surgical groups, does your program follow the same initiative on those groups and not just isolated CABG?
Oh, once they hit the unit and they have that incision on their chest, we treat them all exactly the same. In fact, we have the nurses killing themselves to get the patient off in 6 hours. And we say, it's really a CABG thing. And we also say, but we think everybody benefits. And so we treat every median sternotomy the same way. I mean, even upside down dipsy doodles, we're trying to get off in 6 hours. If they're stable and they're not bleeding and they're not making acid and they can look at you, even if they've had circ arrest, we'll try to get them off in 6 hours.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good. And if the patient's stable and able to handle it, that's the best thing for them, and get them up moving as quick as possible. Get their lungs working. Can you bring, so from Dr. Huey, and she's clarifying on her question from earlier, she meant patients who are kept on the vent longer for hypoxia due to pneumonia, most likely emergent, possible urgent cases. And I think that's where her question was about the complications from the ventilation or prolonged ventilation being related to the pneumonia versus requiring the pneumonia coming from the prolonged ventilation.
Maybe I can remember. I don't think we have a lot of, Dr. Huey, I don't think we have a lot of pneumonias in the urgent and emergent cases coming out of the OR with a pneumonia. don't think that's our problem. It's hard to do this with questions and answers. I'm dying to talk to you to find out exactly what the issues are.
I can put Dr. Huey in. I can put you in contact with Dr. Huey. I know her. She's on our aorta task force. So.
And then I could answer that question maybe better, or maybe I don't know the answer to the question.
Sometimes it's just easier to get clarification. There's other questions here about the goals for this project and what we're looking for. And we're going to be reviewing the data quarterly and hope to see changes quickly. We could see how quickly Hopkins saw changes in their data when they started implementing these. It was within quarters, and within years they saw significant changes. So I think we can expect to do that on a national level if we all get on board with this and get those stakeholders and decision makers behind us. And the champions, the nursing champions in the ICU.
I think that it's true, Carole, but I think that you need a surgeon champion and an ICU champion, an ICU nurse and respiratory therapy champion. I think those 4 champions are really, really important. And somehow our concept of getting the abstractors to give us data on a weekly basis, Kim and Vesa, I think that was so helpful. And maybe this year you could have last week's extubations. Remember the way we did it? I thought that was so helpful to see who was on for more than 24 and who got off in less than 6 and what the rates were, so that people it would remain top of mind.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we can look at that using our participant dashboard on a national level with real-time data for folks who are submitting data real-time. Unfortunately, not everybody does, but if you want to get involved more, please get your data in. And I threw up a list of stakeholders to consider. Of course, our patients, right? We want to let them know ahead of time that we're going to be waking them up and rubbing their faces and telling them that they're going to need to breathe on their own. And we need to make them aware that before we are waking them up in the ICU, before we're standing over them, looking at them eye to eye, nose to nose, saying we're about to pull this tube out of your mouth, we need to give them a heads up, and so that they're aware of it and they're not surprised, more on board with it. And of course, surgeons, pulmonologists, hospitalists, anesthesia. And Dr. Whitman brought up the good point of making sure patients are warm enough when they come out of the ICU or when they come out of the OR. Our nursing leadership, our staff nurses, this is where the ICU nurse champion will be our key advocate here. Respiratory therapists. I worked at different hospitals where one hospital, the nurses had a lot of power, and other hospitals, we depended heavily on the pulmonologist to tell us it was time to extubate. And I could tell you that the hospital where nurses were more involved and right there at patient bedside had more control over it, we got patients extubated quicker and we had better outcomes. And just from what Dr. Whitman said, how they did that at Hopkins. Quality improvement and data abstractors, all are very important. Our C-suite, our administration folks, so we can have the financial backing if we need money for education to have more QI meetings for these projects and support for that. Also, can we offer education to our physicians and our nurses that offer CEs and CEUs so that they're more apt to join those educational opportunities? Our data analysis, our EHR, our IT teams, right? When we're talking about Epic and putting things into Epic or pulling data out of Epic, we need to have somebody on board from these areas that can do that for us. Case management, PT or physical therapy, cardiac rehab, right? What's our plan once we get these patients extubated to make sure we're getting them up and moving, get them on board so they know that what our plan is and that we're going to be needing them, quicker after surgery. So they're not waiting for 2 days to see that patient. And our education department to help with developing educational materials. Those were just the list of people I could think of. I'm sure there's others that I've probably missed. But that's where I think. So, Dr. Whitman, what is the target temp coming out of the OR?
Over 36.5.
Okay, thank you.
Ask me how often we do it.
How often do you do it?
50% of the time.
What's your other 50%? Under 36.5?
But only,
between 35?
Only, is Diane on the line? I think only
15%
of people are under 35.5. 30% of people are between 36 and 36.5, and then we got 50% above 36.5. But when we started this, we were horrible. It was horrible. But then when we started looking at it week to week to week to week, and we use Epic talks to the dashboard, so we get the data. It feeds it. I don't know how it feeds it. Diane knows how it feeds it.
Diane knows how it feeds it because she's a miracle worker with IT stuff and data and all of that.
But I think IT is crucial for this process. IT has to take the stuff that you input into the STS and know how to upload it, and it has to be able to go into the EHR and figure things out. You need IT.
You need IT. And I was just going to say, we were talking, Donna and I were talking about it here, about community hospitals versus teaching hospitals, and the difference in how easy it is to get buy-in from a community hospital because it's a more intimate setting. Everybody knows everybody. There's no fellows coming in and out usually, right? We're all super close and everybody's educated.
If things go wrong, blame it on the fellow.
Yeah, but in your size hospitals, right, and the Hopkins of the world, you have so many people in and out that I can't imagine how difficult it is to educate. So making things as simple as possible, like the signs above the room, I think that's just an ingenious, just a wonderful idea because it's simple and you don't have to train people to read a sign.
Fellow. And that was a fellow. I take back what I said.
There you go. Would you be able to share your extubation protocol?
Yeah. What am I going to do? Send it to you, Carole?
Sure, you can send it to me. I can post it. I can share it. Are patients who are re-intubated included or excluded from your data?
Oh, that less than 6 hours is the first extubation, but we all know that the 24-hour deal is total intubation time.
Okay, thank you.
That's a board question for abstractors.
I'll put it on there. And of course, Dr. Whitman, anesthesia is a big part of this in managing temperature and sedation.
And by the way, they've gotten so much better. I don't even think they use so little fentanyl intraoperatively these days. It's amazing what they have figured out how to sedate patients and take away their pain without overdosing them with narcotics. And so they wake up really fast, which they didn't do. So that's an anesthesia thing. And I honestly don't know enough about it other than what I just told you, but that's where you need an anesthesiologist involved, because despite all the things that we just did, they were working at decreasing narcotics intraoperatively. They get
Yeah, that's great teamwork. It's everybody came together for the goal, and everybody who had a job looked at how their job impacted that outcome and it changed up the routine to make that outcome possible. I think that's wonderful. Kim is saying that her 6 to 8 hour outliers were a staff problem. And I'm sure that this happened, could have been part of the issue, was that they were pulling the respiratory therapist to cover traumas. And once they stopped that process, they returned back to being good at what they were doing. So if people get their hands sticky and they want to steal your respiratory therapist, you got to tell them no, that they're dedicated to the ICU. And I think I'm going to stop here because I know we're going to go over, we're already 10 minutes over, and I'll look at these questions, Dr. Whitman, circle back, bring them back to you if there's something you can answer, and I'll present them on the next call. And hopefully you're not mad at me for surprising you with this today, but thank you very much. And it's always great presentation, even last minute. And I would hope that you're able to join us in the future. And Diane, great job at Hopkins in being part of this project. I know you're a woman of few words, but you're amazing. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody, I know what I got to do. Okay. I'm supposed to tell everybody about this coronary conference, June 3rd through the 4th. If you're interested in this.
I have to leave.
Thank you, Dr. Whitman. Take care, and thank you so much. Have a great
day, everybody.
Thank you so much. This coronary conference, June 3rd and the 4th, 2023 in Miami, Florida. I looked at the agenda. It's fantastic. I wish I could go. If you are interested in this, it covers everything about coronaries for CABG surgery. Please visit the sts.org coronary CONF to register. I will go through the questions and see if there's any that I'm able to answer via email. I think I have everybody's email. And we meet again next week. My ask of you all is to please reach out to me if you've done these projects internally. I may even be reaching out, Diane, to you to see if you'd be able to come back on a coming up webinar to present on how you engaged your IT team, because it sounds like that is key when we're looking at using data.
I'd be happy to do that and share whatever you would like us to share.
Thank you so much, Diane. I depend on you. You have no idea. I love working with you. So thank you. And anybody else who have done these projects or any other type of improvement project where you've seen success, where that process can be transformed to work on vent times, please reach out to me. My goal is that we will continue to work on these, get thoughts out there and ideas out there to share with you that you're able to implement at your site, so that together we can decrease these times nationally. The cost and the outcomes of the patients greatly improve when we see vent times decrease, and we can do it together and help out our healthcare spending at the same time, which is, of course, a major national issue. So our next webinar, we're April 19th right now. Our next webinar will be the 27th. And that time, please note that time is 1 p.m. Central or 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll have a quality improvement series again, and we can even go over some of Dr. Whitman's questions. I would love to have another presenter on if anybody would like to join me. For those participating in the TVT registry, the public reporting consent deadline for 2023 data is April 30th. Any questions, you'll need to reach out to the NCDR on that. But I just mentioned to my team that I would mention the deadline for consenting. May 3rd is our monthly webinar at 2 p.m. Central. We're going to go over Harvest 1 reports, which were posted earlier this week, and then preparing for Harvest Close, which is on May 19th. I'll be sending out site notification for Harvest 2, those sites that are at risk for exclusion. And I think we're still doing it for Harvest 2. And then another quality improvement series on May 17th at 2 p.m. Harvest 2 closes May 19th. OR dates through March 31st, 2023. And then our ACSD quality improvement series at 1 p.m. Central Time on May 25th. So that's where we're at right now. And here are my contact information. Thank you all for joining. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. Didn't realize that this was going to be as awesome as it was. I was a little nervous, but anyway, thanks for joining. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. You have my email. If you need to reach out to me, please do. And it is on the April, no, it's not on there yet. I have to still schedule it, Cyrus, the webinar on the 27th. I just wanted to see how this first one did. All right, thank you all so much for joining. Have a great rest of the day, and please stay safe and be kind to one another. Thank you, bye.